Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching stars drift past on the main screen. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. 3 months into their deep space mission, the routine had become comfortable. Map new star systems, catalog planets, send reports back to Earth. Simple work for a crew of 200 scientists and explorers. The Liberty was humanity's newest ship, built for long-range exploration rather than war. Her hull gleamed white and blue under the bridge lights, and her engines hummed quietly as they pushed through space at a steady pace. Jake had commanded smaller vessels before, but nothing like this. The Liberty represented humanity's hope to find new worlds and maybe, just maybe, other intelligent life, Commander. Lisa Bennett burst through the bridge doors, her face flushed from running. She clutched a datapad against her chest and tried to catch her breath. Jake had never seen his second-in-command look so excited or worried at the same time. "Captain," she gasped, "you need to see this. The sensors are picking up something massive." Jake set down his cold coffee and turned to face her. "How massive are we talking about?" 12 contacts, sir. Each one is at least 50 times bigger than the Liberty. They just appeared out of nowhere, like they dropped out of hyperspace or something." The bridge crew stopped their work and looked up. Navigator Karen Phillips turned from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. These ships are using technology we've never seen before." Jake felt his heart start beating faster. After decades of searching, had humanity finally found proof they weren't alone in the universe? He walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the tactical display. 12 red dots hung in space around them, arranged in a perfect formation that spoke of military precision. "Communications Officer Rodriguez, any signals from the unknown vessels?" Danny Rodriguez, a young man fresh out of the academy, shook his head. "Nothing yet, sir. But I'm monitoring all frequencies." Chief Engineer Pete Johnson's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, those ships are putting out more power than a small star. Whatever they are, they're not using fusion drives like us." Jake walked to the main screen and stared at the distant points of light that represented the alien fleet. Each ship looked like a moving city, bristling with unknown weapons and technology. The Liberty suddenly felt very small and very fragile. "Alert," Jake ordered. "All hands to stations. It's not a drill." The bridge lights dimmed and warning klaxons echoed through the ship. Jake could hear crew members running through the corridors as they rushed to their emergency positions. Dr. Helen Carter's voice came over the speakers. Security Chief Tony Martinez reported that all weapons systems were online, though Jake doubted their small defensive lasers would do much good against ships that size. Captain Danny Rodriguez called out, his voice tight with excitement. "I'm receiving a transmission. It's coming through our universal translator, but the signal is incredibly strong. It must have broadcasting equipment that puts ours to shame." "Put it on speakers," Jake ordered. The bridge fell silent as Danny activated the communication system. What came through? The speakers made everyone freeze in place. A deep, booming voice filled the air, speaking with such dramatic intensity that it sounded like a bad actor in an old movie. "Primitive beings of the third planet, you have trespassed into the sovereign territory of the Zephyrian hegemony, mightiest empire in the galaxy. Your pathetic vessel has dared to enter space claimed by beings far superior to your simple minds can comprehend. Prepare to be boarded and processed for immediate subjugation under the glorious rule of our eternal empire." Jake blinked. He looked around the bridge at his crew, who all wore the same confused expression. The alien's words were threatening enough, but the way they were delivered sounded like something from a children's science fiction show. Lieutenant Amy Walsh, the youngest officer on the bridge, made a small snorting sound. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand, but Jake saw her shoulders shaking. "Did they just call us primitive beings?" Chief Engineer Pete Johnson's voice came through the intercom, and Jake could hear barely controlled laughter in his tone. "Danny." Rodriguez was staring at his communication equipment like it had personally insulted him. "Captain, I've checked the translation 3 times. That's exactly what they said, word for word." Navigator Karen Phillips turned in her chair, her face red from trying not to smile. "Sir, did they really just use the phrase mightiest empire? In the galaxy with a straight face?" Jake felt a laugh building in his chest and fought to keep it down. He was the captain of humanity's most advanced starship, facing first contact with an alien civilization. And all he could think was that these aliens sounded like the villains from every cheesy space movie ever made.
"Maintain discipline," he
said, though his own voice wavered slightly. It's his first contact with an alien species. We need to respond appropriately. He walked to Danny's station and took the microphone. Jake cleared his throat and tried to sound as official and diplomatic as possible. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Liberty. We are explorers from the planet Earth, and we mean no harm to you or your empire. We were conducting peaceful scientific research when we encountered your fleet." The response came back almost immediately, even more dramatic than before. "Your puny vessel shall be absorbed into our glorious fleet, insignificant creatures. You will serve the hegemony as all inferior races must. Resistance is futile, for we are the masters of 1,000 worlds, the bringers of order to chaos, the eternal flame of civilization burning bright across the dark void of space." This time, nobody could hold back. Lieutenant Amy Walsh burst into giggles. Chief Engineer Pete Johnson's laughter echoed through the intercom. Navigator Karen Phillips put her head down on her control panel, her whole body shaking with suppressed mirth. Even Commander Lisa Bennett, who prided herself on military discipline, had to turn away from the main screen to hide her smile. Jake stared at the microphone in his hand, unsure how to respond. These aliens commanded a fleet that could probably destroy the Liberty without breaking a sweat. But they talked like cartoon villains. The disconnect between their obvious technological superiority and their ridiculous speech patterns was almost too much to process. "Captain, Science Officer Gary Mitchell called from his station. I'm analyzing their transmission patterns. The linguistic structure suggests they're not being ironic or sarcastic. I think they actually talk like this all the time." That observation sent a fresh wave of barely controlled laughter through the bridge crew. Danny Rodriguez had to mute their transmission system when he started chuckling. Jake looked at the tactical display, where 12 massive alien warships surrounded his small exploration vessel. Any one of those ships could probably destroy the Liberty, but their commanders spoke like they'd learned diplomacy from old Earth television shows. "This is either going to be the most important moment in human history," Jake muttered to himself, "or the most ridiculous." Commander Lisa Bennett stepped up beside him. "Maybe both, sir." Jake nodded and keyed the microphone again. He had no idea how to handle a situation like this, but he knew humanity was about to learn they weren't alone in the universe. And apparently, the universe had a sense of humor. Admiral Zix Thala stood on the command deck of his flagship, the eternal glory of Zephyr, staring at the small alien vessel through the massive viewing portal. His 6 arms were crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of imperial authority, and his purple, ceremonial robes flowed around his tall, thin frame. The golden medals on his chest caught the light. From the ship's crystal displays, the Admiral had conquered 47 worlds in his long career, and he had never encountered anything like this. Every species they had met before responded to the hegemony's arrival in predictable ways. The primitive ones usually fell to their knees in terror. The more advanced civilizations either surrendered quickly or fought desperately. But these humans were doing something completely different. Sub-Commander Velkoth, the Admiral called to his tactical officer. "What is the status of our boarding preparation?" Velkoth, a younger Zephyrian with bright orange skin and ceremonial battle scars on his forehead, consulted his crystal display. "The boarding party is ready, Admiral." Commander Kralvex has spent the last hour perfecting his entrance speech and adjusting his cape for maximum dramatic effect. Excellent. Oh. What of these strange sounds coming from the alien vessel? Our computers cannot identify them, sir. The aliens appear to be making rhythmic, gasping noises. Some kind of respiratory distress, perhaps. It might be a fear response we have never encountered before. Admiral Zixtella nodded thoughtfully. In his 200 years of service to the hegemony, he had seen many different reactions to imperial power. Fear was common. Rage was expected. But this rhythmic gasping was completely new. The Zephyrian species had been traveling the stars out for over 3,000 years. They had built their empire slowly and carefully, absorbing worlds through a combination of overwhelming military might and impressive diplomatic ceremonies. Every interaction with lesser species followed the same pattern. The hegemony would arrive with great fanfare, deliver speeches about their glorious civilization. The primitive beings would eventually submit to superior authority. It was a system that had worked perfectly for millennia. The Zephyrians took great pride in their ability to inspire awe and respect through the power of their presence alone. Their speeches were works of art, carefully crafted to demonstrate the vast gap between the hegemony and whatever simple civilization they encountered. Admiral Communications Officer Bixandra called from her station. The alien captain is requesting another dialogue. Put him through on the main speakers. Let us see if these humans have come to their senses. Captain Morrison's voice filled the command deck, and Admiral Zix Thala noticed that the humans still sounded strange. There was something in his tone that the Admiral could not identify. It almost sounded like the human was struggling with some kind of internal conflict. Admiral, we appreciate your impressive introduction to your empire. However, we're just explorers from a small planet. We have no interest in conquest or territory. Perhaps we could discuss this situation peacefully. Admiral Zixthela looked at Subcommander Velkoth with confusion. Did he just call our sacred imperial proclamation an impressive introduction? I believe so, sir. But what does he mean by small planet? Do they not understand the insignificance of planetary origins when faced with galactic power? The Admiral activated the communication system and prepared to deliver another demonstration of hegemony authority. He straightened his robes, adjusted his ceremonial helmet, and began speaking in his most commanding voice. Foolish beings of the tiny world, you fail to comprehend the magnitude of your situation. The Zephyrian hegemony spans across the spiral arms of this galaxy like a golden web of order and civilization. We have brought peace to 1,000 worlds, light to the darkness of ignorance, and prosperity to the chaos of primitive existence. Your vessel will be brought aboard our mighty fleet, and you will join the countless billions who serve our eternal empire. There was a moment of silence from the human ship, followed by more of those strange rhythmic sounds. Admiral Zixthela was beginning to suspect that these gasping noises might be some form of communication, though his translators could not decode their meaning. Back on the Liberty, Science Officer Gary Mitchell was working frantically at his station, running linguistic analysis on every word the aliens had spoken. The results were fascinating and hilarious at the same time. Captain, Gary called out, trying to keep his voice steady. I've been studying their speech patterns, vocabulary choices, and cultural references. I think I've figured something out. Captain Morrison walked over to Gary's station, followed by Commander Bennett and several other officers. They were all still struggling to maintain their composure after the Admiral's latest speech. What did you find? Jake asked. Gary pointed to his computer screen, which showed complex linguistic analysis charts. Sir, these aliens aren't trying to be funny. According to my analysis, this is actually how they communicate all the time. Their entire language structure is built around dramatic emphasis, elaborate metaphors, and what we would call theatrical overstatement. You mean they're serious? Commander Bennett asked. Completely serious, ma'am. Look at these patterns. Every sentence they've spoken follows the same format. Grand proclamations, multiple adjectives, references to cosmic destiny and eternal glory. It's not an act. It's their normal way of talking. Lieutenant Amy Walsh leaned over Gary's shoulder to look at the data. So when they say things like golden web of order and civilization, they actually think that sounds intimidating, exactly? More than that, I think they believe this is how all advanced civilizations should communicate. They probably think we're primitive because we use simple, direct language. This revelation sent a fresh wave of laughter through the group. The idea that somewhere in the galaxy was an entire species that talked like dramatic villains from old Earth movies was almost too much to believe. There's more, Gary continued. I've been analyzing their ship design and formation patterns. Everything they do seems designed for maximum visual impact. Look at how they arranged their fleet in that perfect geometric pattern. Look at how their ships are covered in unnecessary decorative elements. I think their entire culture is built around the idea that impressive appearances equal authority. Captain Morrison shook his head in amazement. So we're dealing with a galactic empire that conquered 1,000 worlds by being really, really dramatic? It appears so, sir. And I don't think they have any idea that other species might find their behavior amusing instead of intimidating. Commander, Bennett looked at the tactical display, where the 12 Zephyrian ships maintained their perfect formation around the Liberty. The question is, what do we do about it? They obviously have superior technology, and they seem to think we're going to surrender to their authority. Before anyone could answer, Danny Rodriguez's voice cut through the discussion. Captain, the aliens are requesting permission to send a boarding party to our ship. They want to conduct what they call formal subjugation proceedings. Jake looked. Around it his crew, all of whom were still fighting back laughter. Somehow humanity's first contact with alien life had turned into the strangest comedy of errors in history. Tell them we'll receive their boarding party in the main hangar bay, Jake decided. But warn the security team to maintain their composure. We don't want to start an interstellar incident because we can't stop laughing at their dramatic speeches. The crew prepared for the alien visit. None of them realized that aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Zixthella was dealing with his own confusion. The strange gasping sounds from the human ship had intensified after his latest speech, and his tactical officers were beginning to suspect that the humans had developed some kind of psychological warfare technique that the hegemony had never encountered before. Commander Kralvek stood in the teleportation chamber of the Eternal Glory, adjusting his ceremonial armor one final time. His cape, made from the finest materials in the hegemony, hung perfectly from his shoulders. The silver and gold decorations on his chest plate caught the light as he moved. 20 elite warriors stood behind him, each one wearing elaborate armor designed to inspire fear and respect in primitive species. Remember, soldiers of the hegemony, Kralvex announced to his boarding party, we represent the eternal glory of our empire. These humans must see us as the superior beings we are. Stand tall, speak with authority, and let them witness the magnificent power of Zephyrian civilization. The warriors struck their ceremonial poses, weapons held at precise angles, capes arranged for maximum dramatic effect. Sub-Lieutenant Dexera had spent 15 minutes perfecting the way his helmet reflected the chamber lights. Private Colmuth practiced his intimidating stance until his legs cramped. Teleportation in 3 minutes, the technician announced. All boarding party members prepare for materialization. Kralvex reviewed his entrance speech one last time. He had written it himself, following the traditional format taught in Imperial Military Academy. First, establish the overwhelming power of the hegemony. Second, explain the futility of resistance. Third, offer the glory of serving the Empire. It was a formula that had worked on countless worlds across the galaxy. Meanwhile, in the Liberties, main hangar bay, Captain Morrison and his senior staff waited for their alien visitors. Security Chief Tony Martinez had positioned his people around the bay, though he had given them strict orders to maintain professional behavior regardless of what the aliens did or said. Remember, Jake told his crew, these beings have technology far beyond ours, and they represent a civilization that has conquered over 1,000 worlds. No matter how they talk or act, we need to treat this as a serious diplomatic situation. Dr. Helen Carter, the ship's xenobiologist, stood near the center of the bay with her medical scanner ready. This would be her first chance to study an alien species, and she was trying to contain her excitement. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Barnes, the ship's military advisor, stood next to her with a recording device to document everything for Earth's military command. Incoming teleportation signature announced the bay's computer system. 21 life forms materializing. Purple light filled the hangar bay, accompanied by dramatic smoke effects that seemed completely unnecessary for a simple teleportation process. The light faded slowly, revealing the Zephyrian boarding party in all their theatrical glory. 20 alien warriors stood in perfect formation, their elaborate armor gleaming under the bay lights. Each warrior was about 7 feet tall, with purple or orange skin and 4 arms instead of 2. Their helmets were decorated with flowing plumes, Their weapons looked like works of art rather than practical tools. At the front of the group stood Commander Kralvex, his cape billowing despite the complete lack of air movement in the hangar bay. He had somehow managed to position himself so that the overhead lights created a dramatic silhouette around his figure. The entire human delegation stared in silence for several seconds. The aliens maintained their poses, waiting for their leader to begin his prepared speech. The moment stretched on as both sides studied each other. Finally, Commander Kralvex stepped forward and began to speak in a voice that echoed throughout the hangar bay. Behold, inferior beings of the primitive world called Earth. We are the chosen warriors of the Zephyrian hegemony, bringers of order to chaos, light to darkness, and civilization to the savage corners of the galaxy. I am Commander Kralvex, wielder of the sacred blade of conquest, servant to the eternal throne, and herald of your glorious subjugation. Security Chief Tony Martinez bit his lip so hard he tasted blood. The alien's speech was delivered with such intense seriousness that it sounded like a parody of every space villain ever created. The commander's cape continued to flutter mysteriously. His warriors maintained their dramatic poses throughout the entire announcement. We have traveled across the void of space to bring you the magnificent gift of imperial rule. Your simple minds cannot comprehend the honor that has been bestowed upon you. To serve the hegemony is to touch the very essence of cosmic greatness. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Barnes made a strange choking sound and quickly covered it with a cough. Dr. Helen Carter was staring at the aliens with her mouth slightly open, not sure if she should laugh or applaud. The entire human group was struggling desperately not to react to what sounded like the most over-the-top performance they had ever witnessed. Captain Morrison stepped forward, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure. Commander Kralvex, welcome aboard the Liberty. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, and we're honored to meet representatives of your civilization. Honor, Kralvex repeated, his voice rising dramatically. You speak of honor while failing to prostrate yourselves before imperial authority? You not understand that you are in the presence of beings who have brought countless worlds under the protective wing of hegemony rule? The word prostrate sent Lieutenant Amy Walsh into a fit of barely controlled giggles. She turned away from the aliens and pretended to study a wall panel while her shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. Dr. Helen Carter, trying to save the situation, approached the alien commander with her medical scanner. Commander, we're very interested in learning about your species and your culture. Would you be willing to participate in a peaceful exchange of information? Kralvex looked down at the small human female with confusion. In his experience, primitive beings either cowered in terror or attacked in desperation when faced with imperial might. This human seemed to be making friendly conversation as if they were discussing the weather. Exchange of information? He repeated. You speak as if you have knowledge worthy of imperial attention. We are the inheritors of 3,000 years of galactic civilization. What could a species that has barely left its home world possibly teach the masters of the galaxy? The question was asked with such genuine arrogance that several humans started making small choking sounds. Chief Medical Officer Paul Green excused himself from the hangar bay, claiming he needed to check on something in sick bay. Dr. Carter continued her diplomatic approach, though her voice wavered slightly. Well, for example, we could share information about our cultures, our histories, our different ways of solving problems. Every species has unique perspectives that could benefit others. Benefit the hegemony? Kralvex asked, genuinely puzzled. We are the pinnacle of galactic evolution. We have perfected the arts of war, diplomacy, and governance. Our ships are the finest in the galaxy, our warriors the most skilled, our leaders the wisest. What could we possibly learn from a species that has achieved none of these things? This statement was delivered with such complete seriousness that Tony Martinez actually had to leave the hangar bay. His departure was followed by 2 more security officers who suddenly found urgent duties elsewhere. Commander, Kralvex noticed the humans leaving and interpreted this as a sign that his words were having the proper effect. Clearly, these primitive beings were beginning to understand the vast gap between their simple civilization and the magnificent power of the hegemony. You see, he continued, already your people flee before the overwhelming truth of imperial superiority. This is the natural response of lesser beings when confronted with genuine greatness. Captain Morrison looked around at his remaining crew members, all of whom were red-faced from trying not to laugh. He realized that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, but he had no idea how to explain to the aliens that humans weren't fleeing in terror.
Ow!
They were simply trying not to burst into hysterical laughter at the most dramatically serious speech they had ever heard. Admiral Zixtala paced back and forth on the command deck of his flagship, his ceremonial robes swishing with each step. Reports from the boarding party were confusing and contradictory. Commander Kralvex insisted that the humans were showing proper fear by fleeing from his presence, but the Admiral had his doubts. Sub-Commander Velkath, the Admiral called, "Patch me through to the human vessel. I wish to speak directly with their leader. At once, Admiral." Opening communications. Channel. On the Liberty's bridge, Danny Rodriguez looked up from his console with surprise. "Captain Morrison to the bridge. The alien admiral wants to speak with you directly." Jake arrived on the bridge within minutes, still trying to process what had happened in the hangar bay. Half his crew had fled the scene to avoid laughing at the alien boarding party. The other half were still struggling to maintain their composure. The situation was becoming impossible to manage. "Put him through," Jake ordered, settling into his captain's chair. Admiral Zixtala's image appeared on the main screen, and Jake had to grip the armrests of his chair to keep from reacting. The alien leader wore the most elaborate uniform Jake had ever seen, covered in medals, ribbons, and decorative elements that served no practical purpose. His helmet was topped with flowing plumes that moved dramatically as he spoke. "Captain Morrison of the primitive vessel Liberty," the Admiral began, his voice booming through the bridge speakers. "I am Admiral Zixtala, Supreme Commander of the 15th Imperial Fleet, guardian of the sacred flame of civilization, and bringer of order to the Outer Rim territories." Navigator Karen Phillips quickly muted her station controls to hide her snickering. Communications Officer Danny Rodriguez pretended to be very interested in checking his equipment settings. Admiral Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "What can I do for you? I have received reports from my boarding party that suggest your species may possess unusual mental capabilities. Commander Kralvex tells me that your people flee before the mere presence of Imperial authority. This indicates either tremendous wisdom or some form of psychological warfare we have not previously encountered." Jake blinked, the aliens thought. His crew's desperate attempts not to laugh were signs of either wisdom or warfare. "Admiral, I think there might be some misunderstanding about human behavior." "Misunderstanding?" Admiral Zixtala drew himself up to his full height, which made his plumes wave even more dramatically. "The Zephyrian hegemony has successfully integrated 1,247 worlds into our glorious empire. We understand primitive psychology better than any civilization in the galaxy. With respect, Admiral, I don't think our reactions are what you think they are." The Admiral's expression grew suspicious. "Explain yourself, creature of the small world." Jake took a deep breath and decided to try a direct approach. "Admiral, my crew isn't fleeing in fear. They're trying not to laugh." The words hung in the air for several seconds. Admiral Zixtala stared at the screen with complete confusion, as if Jake had just spoken in an unknown language. "Laugh?" the Admiral repeated slowly. "What is this word laugh?" Jake looked around his bridge at his crew members, who were all staring at the screen with amazement. The aliens didn't know what laughter was. "Laughing is something humans do when we find something funny or amusing," Jake explained carefully. "It's a sound we make when something strikes us as humorous."
Humorous.
Admiral Zixtala said the word like he was tasting something unpleasant. "You find the presence of Imperial authority amusing? Well, yes, your speech isn't dramatic. Presentations are very different from how humans normally communicate. To us, they sound like performances from our entertainment shows." The Admiral's face went through several different expressions, none of which Jake could interpret. Behind the Admiral, other Zephyrian officers were gathering around their command stations, apparently trying to understand what the human captain was saying. "You mock the sacred traditions of the hegemony?" the Admiral asked, his voice rising to dramatic heights. "You dare to treat the eternal glory of our empire as mere entertainment?" "We're not mocking you," Jake said quickly. "It's just that you're way of speaking is so different from ours. When you use phrases like eternal glory and sacred flame of civilization, it sounds very theatrical to human ears. Theatrical, the Admiral repeated. This word means performance, does it not? Yes, like acting in a play or a movie. Admiral Zixthala turned away from the screen and began speaking rapidly to his officers in their own language. Jake could hear excited chatter in the background as the Zephyrians discussed this new information. After several minutes, the Admiral turned back to the screen. His expression was different now, less confident and more confused. Captain Morrison, are you? Telling me that the humans find our diplomatic protocols entertaining? I'm afraid so, Admiral. From our perspective, you sound like characters from our fictional stories about space empires. The bridge of the eternal glory fell completely silent. Jake could see alien officers staring at their admiral with expressions of shock and confusion. Finally, Admiral Zixthala spoke again, his voice much quieter than before. In 3,000 years of galactic expansion, no species has ever described hegemony protocols as fictional entertainment. Every species is different, Admiral. What? Seems normal to you might seem unusual to us, and vice versa. On the Liberty's bridge, Commander Lisa Bennett had joined the conversation. She stepped forward and addressed the alien admiral directly. Admiral Zixthala, perhaps we could arrange a more formal meeting to discuss our cultural differences. It seems like both our species have a lot to learn about each other. The admiral looked at her with interest. You suggest a diplomatic conference? Exactly. We could meet in a neutral setting and share information about our respective civilizations. No conquest, no subjugation, just peaceful communication between two intelligent species. Admiral Zixthala consulted with his officers again, this time in quieter tones. Jake could see them pointing at various displays and having intense discussions. After several minutes, the admiral returned his attention to the screen. This proposal is unprecedented, he admitted. The hegemony has never engaged in purely cultural exchange with a newly discovered species. There's a first time for everything, Jake said. We could learn from each other. But you are a primitive species from a single world. What could you possibly teach the masters of a galactic empire? Commander Bennett smiled. Well, for one thing, we could teach you about humor and laughter. It seems like that might be something new for your people. The Admiral's expression grew thoughtful. This laughter response of yours, it is not a sign of fear or submission? Not at all. It's actually a sign that we're relaxed and comfortable. When humans laugh, it usually means we're enjoying ourselves. Enjoy our presence. In a way, yes. You're certainly the most interesting aliens we could have hoped to meet. Admiral Zixthala seemed to be processing this information with great difficulty. His entire understanding of how first contact should work was being challenged by these strange humans who found imperial authority amusing rather than intimidating. Captain Morrison, the Admiral said finally, I believe we need to discuss this situation further. Would you be willing to come aboard our flagship for formal negotiations? Jake looked around at his crew, who were all nodding encouragingly. This was humanity's chance to establish peaceful relations with an advanced alien civilization, even if that civilization had some unusual communication habits. I'd be honored, Admiral, but I have one request. What is your request? Could you? Ask your people to try not to be too dramatic during the meeting. My crew is still learning to control their laughter response. Admiral Zixthala paused, then made what might have been the first diplomatic concession in hegemony history. We will ... attempt to moderate our traditional presentation style for the comfort of your delegation. 3 days later, the largest Zephyrian fleet in 50 years emerged from hyperspace near Earth. Admiral Zixthalla's report about the strange human psychological responses had traveled quickly through Imperial Command. Supreme Overlord Stockseamer himself had decided to investigate this mysterious species that laughed at galactic authority. The Supreme Overlord's flagship, the Infinite Majesty of Stars, was 3 times larger than any other ship in the fleet. Its hull was covered in precious metals and glowing crystals that created patterns visible from thousands of miles away. 50 escort vessels surrounded the massive ship in a formation that looked like a golden flower blooming in space. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching the alien fleet appear on her screens. She had been briefed about the first contact situation, including the unusual communication styles of the Zephyrian Empire. Still, she was not prepared for what came next. Admiral Hayes, Communications Officer Mike Jackson, called from his station. "We're receiving a transmission from the alien fleet. Signal is incredibly strong and they're broadcasting on every frequency at once." "Put it through," Patricia ordered. The voice that filled the command center was deeper and more dramatic than anything they had heard from the previous Zephyrian contacts. Supreme Overlord Thaxamar's words echoed through the room like thunder. "Rolling across mountains, greetings inhabitants of the third world from its star. I am Supreme Overlord Thaxamar, Master of the Eternal Throne, Guardian of 10,000 Suns, Bringer of Peace to the Chaos of Space, and Supreme Commander of all Zephyrian forces across the galaxy. I have traveled across the vast emptiness between stars to witness with my own senses the species that has developed the power to weaponize amusement against Imperial authority." Admiral Hayes looked around the command center at her staff, who were all struggling to maintain professional composure. The alien leader's introduction had lasted nearly 2 minutes and included references to cosmic destiny, the tears of fallen stars, and the eternal symphony of Imperial might. "Did this guy just threaten to invade us with a poetry recital?" Admiral Hayes asked her tactical officer. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez nodded, his face red from trying not to laugh. "Yes, ma'am, I believe he did." The comment was broadcast on open channels, and within seconds, it had reached every ship in both the human defense fleet and the Zephyrian Armada. The human crews dissolved into laughter, while the Zephyrian officers frantically tried to understand what they had just heard. Supreme Overlord Thaxamar stood on his command deck, surrounded by his most trusted advisors, completely confused by the human response. His grand introduction, which had taken 3 hours to write and had been practiced for days, had somehow caused the same strange gasping sounds that Admiral Zixtala had reported. Cultural Analysis Officer Bay Cathara, the Supreme Overlord, called. "What is your interpretation of this human reaction?" Spicthera, a thin Zephyrian with 4 eyes and pale blue skin, consulted her data screens. "Supreme Overlord, based on Admiral Zixela's reports, the humans appear to respond to demonstrations of Imperial power with a behavior they call laughter. Our intelligence suggests this may be a defensive mechanism designed to reduce the psychological impact of superior authority." "Fascinating," the Supreme Overlord mused. "A species that has evolved mental defenses against conquest. No wonder they have survived long enough to develop space travel." Back on Earth, the situation was escalating in ways nobody had expected. News networks were broadcasting the alien transmissions live. The entire planet was listening to the Supreme Overlord's dramatic speeches. Social media was exploding with jokes and memes about the overly serious space empire that talked like cartoon villains. Captain Morrison, who had returned to Earth for emergency consultations, stood in the Luna Base command center trying to explain the situation to Admiral Hayes. "Ma'am, they're not trying to be funny. This is genuinely how their entire civilization communicates. They think dramatic speeches and elaborate ceremonies are signs of advanced culture. And they have no concept of humor," Admiral Hayes asked. "None. At all. The word doesn't exist in their language. They interpret our laughter as either fear or some kind of psychological warfare technique." Admiral Hayes shook her head in amazement. "So we're dealing with a galactic empire that conquered 1,000 worlds by being really, really serious about everything." "Exactly. Now their supreme leader is here because he thinks we've developed some kind of anti-imperial weapon based on amusement." The conversation was interrupted by another transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. Supreme Overlord Thaxamar's voice filled the command center again, even more dramatic than before. "People of Earth, I challenge your greatest warrior to single combat, as is the tradition when facing opponents worthy of Imperial attention. Let your champion face mine in honorable battle, and we shall determine whether your strange, mental powers can overcome the martial skill of the hegemony's finest fighter." Admiral Hayes looked at her staff with complete bewilderment. "Did he just challenge us to a duel?" "Yes, ma'am," Lieutenant Colonel Martinez confirmed. "Apparently that's How they settle disputes with species they consider worthy opponents. Who are we supposed to send? Our best pilot? A Marine? Before anyone could answer, a voice called out from the back of the command center, "I'll do it." Everyone turned to see Jerry Martinez, a civilian comedian who had been at Luna Base filming an entertainment special for the troops. He was a small, ordinary-looking man in his 30s who had somehow wandered into the most important military facility on Earth. "Sir, you're not military personnel," Admiral Hayes pointed out. "That's exactly why I should go," Jerry replied. "You heard what?" Captain Morrison said, "These aliens take everything seriously because they don't understand humor. Maybe what they need is someone who can show them how to laugh at themselves." Admiral Hayes considered the suggestion. The situation was already so bizarre that sending a comedian to face an alien empire actually seemed reasonable. "Do you understand that you could be facing some kind of advanced alien warrior?" she asked. Jerry shrugged. "Lady, I've performed stand-up comedy in Detroit. I think I can handle one dramatic alien." 2 hours later, Jerry Martinez found himself aboard the Infinite Majesty of Stars, standing in the largest room he had ever seen. The Zephyrian throne room was designed to impress, with crystal columns reaching toward a ceiling painted with scenes of galactic conquest. Thousands of alien courtiers lined the walls, all wearing elaborate ceremonial robes. Supreme Overlord Thaxamar sat on a throne made from what appeared to be solid gold, surrounded by floating crystals that hummed with energy. When Jerry entered the room, the Supreme Overlord rose and began what was clearly intended to be an intimidating speech. "Behold, champion of the small blue world, you stand before the eternal majesty of the Zephyrian throne. Here, in this sacred chamber where the fate of countless worlds has been decided, you will face the ultimate test of your species' worthiness." Jerry looked around the enormous room, taking in the dramatic lighting, the elaborate decorations, and the thousands of aliens watching him with intense seriousness. Then he did something that no being had ever done in the sacred throne room of the Zephyrian Empire. He started his comedy routine. "Wow, this place is really something," Jerry began, his voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. "I mean, I've seen some over-the-top decorating before, but you guys really went all out. Did you hire the same interior designer who did Las Vegas? Because this screams space casino to me." The throne room fell completely silent. Supreme Overlord Thaxamar stared at the small human with confusion, while his courtiers looked at each other uncertainly. Jerry continued, warming up to his audience. "And that entrance speech, Your Majesty, that was really impressive. I haven't heard that much dramatic build-up since my cousin's wedding, although to be fair, my cousin also thinks he's the center of the universe." Something unprecedented happened in the throne room. A few Zephyrian courtiers made small sounds that might have been the beginning of laughter. The Supreme Overlord noticed and looked shocked. "You mocked the sacred dignity of the imperial throne?" Thaxamar demanded. "I'm not mocking anything," Jerry replied. "I'm just pointing out that maybe you guys take yourselves a little too seriously. I mean, you conquered 1,000 worlds, right? It's pretty impressive. You don't need all the fancy speeches and dramatic poses to prove you're powerful. Sometimes the most impressive thing you can do is just relax and enjoy yourself." The first time in his 200-year reign, Supreme Overlord Thaxamar found himself considering the possibility that the Zephyrian Empire might have been approaching galactic diplomacy all wrong. "You suggest," the Supreme Overlord said slowly, "that we should be less formal? I'm suggesting that maybe you should try laughing once in a while. Trust me, it feels great." And then, in a moment that would be remembered throughout galactic history, Supreme Overlord Thaxamar did something that no Zephyrian ruler had ever done before. He chuckled. The sound echoed through the throne room like thunder. Suddenly, thousands of Zephyrian courtiers were making the same sound. For the first time in their civilization's history, the Zephyrian Empire was learning to laugh.